So before we launch the poll, I want to give everybody just kind of a little backstory as to how these imagining meetings came up. Is that in the past, we've done some really great wardens meetings throughout the diocese. And then as we entered into COVID, we had to pivot away from doing those in person and we did those online. But then we also did a lot of meetings basically centered around COVID. And we wanted to take a step forward again into listening to what's going on around the diocese. The canons were meeting with the bishop in December, and we said, well, there's no better time than the beginning of the year to do something like this. And so we started building the airplane as we were flying it. We've had a lot of input from the regional missioners through John to kind of craft this time. This is meant to be not just an end all be all, these three, we're done, we move on. Instead, these are supposed to create a foundation for the work that we're going to continue to do. So we plan to have probably a lot of these in the next year, maybe focusing on different areas of ministry throughout our diocese, maybe talking about social justice and advocacy, maybe talking about the 5 different realities that we're leaning into as a diocese, talking about new possibilities. We want to see what's bubbling up, and we want to listen, and we want to be able to be nimble in these times where we feel that the future is very bright for us. So with that, Kirsten, I wonder if you might be able to launch the poll.
Yeah, so I launched it and I hadn't taken it away. I wondered if you wanted me to. And it looks like people are.
Oh, people are answering?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Supposedly, by doing this poll, this is how we'll break into breakout rooms later on, based on your answer. So,
Kirsten, can you launch it again? I
Yeah,
didn't
it was
realize.
on my screen and then I just closed out of it because it was taking up the whole screen. So
Yeah, I closed out of
I don't
it
know
as
where
well.
it went.
Just click on the polls on the bottom and it'll come back up.
Okay, good. Because I don't want to end the poll and it doesn't look like I can launch again.
Okay.
thank you, everybody, while we do some of this
Good job.
housekeeping stuff that'll make the end of our meeting go much smoother.
I don't see polls at the bottom of my screen.
Probably if you click on mine has a thing, it says more and 3
Yeah, I had to click on the little 3 dots above more and then it came up.
We have
Don't
94,
have that.
we have 94 participants, and it looks like how many people? I can't see the poll, unfortunately. Kirsten, how many people have answered so far?
I'll read them one at a time through the region. So 21, 24, 8, 6, 23.
Okay. Is there anybody that has not voted?
That's 82, Mike.
That's
Yeah.
82.
That's pretty good. So
I'm still having trouble finding it. I don't have the more button.
Well, if we only have a dozen people that haven't been able to take the poll at the end when we do launch the breakout rooms, as long as you know which region you are in, we will be able to move into those breakout rooms, or we can place you in those breakout rooms. And I believe Bishop Kim is logging on now.
yes, we just had her join.
Great.
Good evening, y'all. Apologies for making you wait. It's good to see everybody here. Are we praying yet?
Please pray us in, Bishop.
Oh, great. Well, I'm going to offer this prayer. It's one of my favorite Episcopal prayers ever. So the Lord be with you.
Also
Let
with
us
you.
pray. O God of unchangeable power and eternal light, look favorably on your whole church, that wonderful and sacred mystery. By the effectual working of your providence, carry out in tranquility the plan of salvation. Let the whole world see and know that things which were cast down are being raised up, and things which had grown old are being made new, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by him through whom all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for joining. I am excited to be on this discernment journey with you, as that is what I consider this. This is our discernment journey together. I will start by saying I was thinking about being on the meet and greets or walkabouts when I was discerning a call here as Bishop of the Episcopal Church in Colorado. And I remember saying to the search committee that I am not an inventor. I don't invent things, that I am an innovator. I said, so that makes me more like Michael Dyson than Booker T. Washington. If you give me a vacuum, I will find out all the things that could be improved on that vacuum, and we'll try to make a better, more efficient vacuum that meets the needs that I have. So that's kind of my orientation in terms of gifts. And so I bring that to all of my ecclesial work. I brought it to my work as a parish priest for over 20 years. And I bring it to my work as bishop. And I wanted to take a little time to talk about my theology and understanding of what it is to be a bishop and what leadership in this capacity is like. And to have you all talk about how we discern this work that we are being called to do. I think the global pandemic taught us a lot about who we are as church. It made very clear that there were some ways of being church that we had grown very used to and very attached to that are no longer sustainable. And as we move into this ever-changing, ever rapidly changing church landscape, I wanted to be intentional about being in conversation with you about that. I want to share, there's a book called The Episcopate, and I wrote an article for it. It was part of your pre-work, but there are lots of really good articles in it from my siblings and colleagues in Christ. But I want to share a piece from my really good friend, Rob Wright. He and I have been friends and colleagues for almost 30 years, and we talk a lot, we share a lot, we have a lot of the same loves about church work. And Bishop Wright is the Bishop of Atlanta, and he wrote these words. The bishop is peer to all baptized people, and yet a bishop is conferred with a unique role and authority among the baptized. A bishop is concomitantly a guardian and creator, a conservator with a risk-taking streak, or a risk taker with a heart for conservation. A bishop is a planter or plucker up of things, a speaker and question maker. A bishop serves as an embodiment of God's grace and mercy, particularly to the errant and weak, while establishing and maintaining boundaries and discipline. A bishop is a steward of why in a what and how much world. Given to many words, but thriving in silence. A solitary soul adventurer situated in the heart of community, making a living as a public theologian. And I think that he captures really well sort of the challenge of how church leadership is rolling out in our world, and particularly the challenge of the episcopacy. For me, when I talk about church being lay-led and clergy supported, I include myself in that, because for me, leadership is not about me doing work for you. It's not about me telling you what to do. It's about working with each one of you in your particular leadership capacity and leaning in to how you live your ministry. That's what I consider my job is. My job is to lean in with you to figure out how you are being called in the particularity of your own context to serve the church and the world, to worship God, to embody Christ in your particular context. Given that we live in Colorado, we know we have a whole lot of different contexts. We have this vast geography that we live in that is beautiful, that I love exploring. We have very different differences, very different approaches to ministry in various contexts. We have city, we have resort, we have rural, we have almost everything in a diocesan context that you could possibly imagine. And yet we are called together to be the Episcopal Church in Colorado. And that is about us being in conversation and being in relationship. And so when I talk about the future that we're being called into requires us to be imaginative. It is about us figuring out what the possibilities of relationship are, not just amongst ourselves, but what are the possibilities of relationship in our communities, in our wider world? How do we build those relationships in such a way that we show forth the good news that has been given to us? I think in our world where there are so many different claims on the person of Jesus Christ, I think the most authentic claims are those where people are trying to live a life in alignment with Jesus Christ. It's easy to love Jesus. It's harder to follow Jesus. And the Gospels teach us that at every turn. My husband is fond of reminding me that when Jesus was on the cross, there was a dude and a handful of women, that his following had dwindled to that, because this path of love, this willingness to be loving in a hate-filled world, this path of generosity and kindness, this path of giving is hard. And it is more and more difficult in the church context. I don't know if any of you heard the NPR interview where an evangelical leader was talking about how he would get calls from pastors who said that they had preached on the Sermon of the Mount and then were accosted after service by people asking them where he got those liberal talking points. And what this person said was most distressing is that when people replied, no, that is literally what Jesus said, the response is he was wrong. That doesn't work these days. And so if we think about the gospel as some sort of tactic or strategy that we can let go if we don't feel it's working, then I guess that's correct. But if we consider that the gospel is the roadmap for abundant life in this world, if we consider that it is our only alternative to the violence and chaos around us, then it is incumbent upon us to bend ourselves to that, no matter how hard it is. And how we make that witness in this world is, to my mind, going to be our greatest challenge. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because of what I see bubbling up here in the Episcopal Church in Colorado. I'm hopeful because I see people embracing their own baptismal covenant. I see congregations grappling with their why. Why are we here? What is God calling us to? And I recognize that as a diocese, that's our task. Our task is not for me to tell you how to live out this vision, because at the end of the day, it's not my vision. It is not Kim Lucas's vision. It is God's vision that we are being called into, that we are being called to embrace and to strive towards that. And how we get there is through discernment, the hard, long work of discernment. And for me, discernment, I always tell people, discernment is not deciding. You don't say, God, this is what I want, make it so, done. That's not how that works. Discernment is really about prayer and struggle and trying things and listening and praying more and being in relationship and conversation. And that is how I believe God's vision is revealed. God reveals God's self and God's path for us in that. And so I'm excited about this because these are the kind of first baby steps in us figuring out how we do that together, how we work on being in communication and conversation, how we listen deeply to one another, and how we do that work of discernment together, because we're going to have to do it together for it to mean anything and for it to be anywhere close to what I believe God is calling us to. So that's my preface. Mike, you're in charge.
Oh, I'm in charge.
Yeah.
Okay. The other topics that we were going to talk about, the role of a bishop. I don't have it up in front of me. Feel free to chime in if you have that in front of you.
Wait, let me pull it up. I can pull it up.
How our leadership landscape is changing, the realities we currently live in, paradigm shifts in our different contexts.
Thank you so much. And I'll put that in the chat. Back to you, Bishop.
Great, thank you. So the thing I want to talk about is the role of the office of the bishop. And I am very intentional about that language. A lot of times people will say, oh, the diocese, when they're talking about the office of the bishop. And I want to be very, very clear. The diocese, the Episcopal Church in Colorado, which is organized as a diocese, is composed of 93 congregations and almost 20,000 people. And so when you say the diocese, I want you to think to yourself, I'm talking about 93 congregations and almost 20,000 people. The office of the bishop has a specific role in the life of the diocese, but we are not the diocese. And so I want to be really clear about that language, because I think the clearer we are with our language, the better we communicate. And then talk a little bit about the role of the office of the bishop. I often tell people that as bishop in the Episcopal Church, I represent the institution. For better or for worse, I represent the institution of the Episcopal Church. In my role as that representation, I feel like the chief parts of my job are to make space for clergy and lay leaders to live into the prophetic witness of the gospel, to make space for you to do that, to make sure that you have the creative room to live into the challenges of that particular call. And the other part that I play is the weeding out of bad apples. That's really sort of the institutional work that I'm about. Beyond that, there are the things that I vowed in my ordination, and part of that is being the one who holds up the doctrine, discipline, and worship of this church. I am keenly aware that I have the role of living into my faith very publicly, and not just living into it, but promoting it in a very public way. And that's key to me as well. I think for all that my denomination gets wrong, there's some things that we're really attuned to, and part of that is around accountability. I am very aware that while I'm not responsible for everything that happens in this diocese, I am accountable for everything that happens in this diocese. And that's a pretty heavy burden, I have to say, and one that I take very seriously. So for me, the work of being bishop is about being attentive to and mindful of and promoting the health and wellness of the Episcopal Church in Colorado. And that's congregational wellness, that's clergy wellness, that's all of that stuff. In addition to continually reminding myself and all of us why it is we do this, that this is not about vainglory. This is not about building ourselves up. This is about building up the body of Christ and being the reconcilers that we're called to be. As I look at the Episcopal Church, I am very aware of the statistics. I am very aware, as I spoke at our annual convention, that we are a church in decline. Some of that decline has a lot to do with birth rates in the US. In fact, if you layer our congregational growth and decline as a denomination over the birth rate in the United States, they line up pretty well. So there are things that we can't control, but there's also a place where I believe we are being called to be in touch with and we're called to encounter more deeply the world around us, and to be louder about what it means to be an Episcopalian. And I know that's hard for us in a lot of ways. Growing up, Episcopalians didn't talk much about their faith. I sojourned with the Methodists, and that's where I learned how to do it. And so we have some learning curve, but I think some of what we've taken out of our encounter with the COVID pandemic is that we Episcopalians are a lot more flexible than we thought we were. We managed to figure out how to do church online. So many churches are still using online platforms to be in touch with people. People are finding the Episcopal Church from our online presence. And that landscape is what I feel the office of the bishop is having to be attentive to, and that our task is then to support the ministries of our congregations. My goal, when I retire, I hope that every congregation in the Episcopal Church in Colorado is a strong congregation, is a congregation who knows exactly who they are, what they're called to, what their ministry is in their community. My hope is that when I retire, every Episcopal congregation will have had such an impact and effect on its community that it doesn't matter if the whole community goes there, the whole community knows about the Episcopal Church. And so that is what my goal is. And when I looked for staff for the office of the bishop, I look for staff who were actually going to help me lean into that mission as we supported congregations. A diocese is only as strong as its weakest congregation. And so my staff and I have committed that our task is to help you find the authentic call that God has put before you, and to figure out how to help you lean into that. Mike, you're going to have to remind me because I'm sleep deprived and crazed. But as an office, we decided that our task, our mission was to engage, equip, and empower our congregations and congregational leadership. That's what we feel we are called to do. And we can only do that if we know how you need equipping, how you need encouragement, how you need empowerment. So that's part of this conversation. Another thing that is real right now is the truth of institutional instability and distrust. There is a generation of folks coming up who don't trust institutions. They don't join Rotary or the Lions. They don't trust institutional formulations. And church is one of those institutions that people aren't trusting. And so as we become more and more secular, I had a conversation with someone who was telling me that they thought, I think the city of Boulder is one of the most like not Christian places I've ever heard of. I was like, well, come on out. We have this reality, and I think it's especially true in the West and on the West Coast, especially that there is this increase in secularization. And I find it fascinating. I'm often stunned by it. I had a conversation with a bunch of young adults. There are about 20 folks in the room. And when I asked if anybody had any association with church, only 3 raised their hand. When I asked if any of them were currently involved in church, 0, none of them, which is stunning, but it's real. The other thing about our landscape that's changing is that because of the decline of membership in the church, we don't have sort of a regular pipeline for ordained leadership. I was born in 1970. My mom was not a regular church attender, but in and out of church. And so I was baptized in the Episcopal Church because that's where I was. And as an adult, I made the choice to make this my church. It became my church home. But we're not having so much of that. And one of the things that I really appreciate about being here in the Episcopal Church of Colorado is that we've developed this idea that our youth ministry is not just about the youth in a particular congregation, it's about the youth all over our diocese. And we have worked to make that manifest so that even if you are in a church and you're, in Mineral County, the oldest county in Colorado, and you don't have any youth, that's okay. You can still be involved in youth ministry. You can still be supportive of youth ministry because as a diocese, as a big church, we have that ministry. And that's powerful to me. Another reality that we are living in our leadership landscape, Vanessa can speak a little bit more to this, is about the lack of clergy, and not just the lack of clergy, but the closing and consolidation of seminary. I mean, I said to my advisory group on ordained ministry, I don't even know what the seminary landscape is going to look like in 3 years. I don't. And I'll invite Vanessa to say a little bit about your recent encounter at the Transitional Ministry Conference.
Thank you, Bishop Kim. So I was at the Transition Ministry Conference for provinces 5, 6, and 7 in December. And we posted on a sheet of paper all the dioceses who were there and how many openings we have. And it's consistent with the other provinces across the church that we have twice as many folks retiring and half as many getting ordained. So that's been challenging as far as finding interims when a clergy retire. And it's even having an impact for our clergy who want to take a Sunday off. There aren't as many people available to do supply on Sundays. So it's impacting on our churches across the whole diocese in a lot of ways. And one of the things that we are uniquely doing in our diocese is our licensed lay pastoral ministry program, for which I'm really grateful we have that. Bishop, you're muted.
Thank you, Vanessa. And so what I think we are being called to in this moment, in this time, is to be about engaging our sacred imagination on how we are church in this time, in this moment, how we are spreading this gospel that we've been given, how we're living out the promises we make at our baptism, and how do we help nourish people with word and sacrament. And part of that work, from my part, is about our lay pastoral leader program. And I've been working with Greg Foraker and Tracy Methy on figuring out how we form people, because formation is important. How we help encourage people, and not only just in terms of giving them a body of knowledge, but how do we help them form and minister with community? That is a challenge. The realities we live in our world, in addition to an increased secularization of our world, in addition to the dwindling of church membership across the board, we are facing a time in which the mental health crisis is real. The suicide rates in our particular state have not decreased at all since I got here almost 5 years ago. We are dealing with people, especially young adults, who feel more and more isolated, who have a hard time finding a sense of community. We're living in ever increasing economic disparity, which is real and is manifest all over this state. We are living with a gun violence epidemic. We are living with a climate that is growing increasingly warmer, which is what makes for an unstable jet stream and crazy cold weather. So, it's not that the negatives are in spite of climate change, they're actually because of it. We're living in a time where people are struggling for the right to be who they are, even if their identity doesn't fit into the cut and dried binary world that we sort of tried to construct. And all of that is happening, and there are so many folks that want to lay judgment on those things, when in fact our baptismal covenant encourages us to continue to love even in the uncertainty, even when we don't know what else to do, that our call is to be loving examples of Christ. And we can only do that if we're curious, and we can only do that if we can imagine the world differently. And so that's where we are. That's the landscape that we're standing on. And the hard work is then figuring out, how do we adapt to this landscape? I was telling someone, Adam Hamilton, who is the pastor of the largest Methodist congregation in the world right now, I believe. had this wonderful analogy. He said, I'm an Elvis fan. And he said, I started listening to Elvis on records. He said, and then I got an 8-track player. And he had the same album that he had on the record on his 8-track. And then he got a cassette. And then he got an MP3. And he said, Elvis's music is the same. The delivery mechanism is what has changed. And if you ask some people, like kids like mine are now more interested in the vinyl again, which cracks me up. But when I think about that analogy in terms of church, it resonates with me because the gospel hasn't changed. The gospel message we've been given is the same, but we have to figure out what the mechanism is going to be. How do we bring that to people? How do we deliver it? And that's going to take us rethinking, reimagining almost every aspect of what it means to be church. But I think we can do it because I think if we focus on what our mission is and not the method, then the methodology becomes clearer. If we're really clear about what the mission is, then the methodology and the delivery mechanism, I think, will become clear as long as we're focused on the mission part. I want to invite Mike to talk a little bit because he works in communication to talk about the various tools that we are trying to employ in the office of the bishop, and that we're trying to invite other folks into trying with us. So Mike, you want to talk a little bit about communicators?
Sure. As many of you know, about 6 years ago, we launched Caffeinated Church as a tool, a resource hub in our diocese. Once the pandemic started and we had 2 years under our belt, we continued to do more and more workshops that were geared towards communicators and administrators across the church. And the more word got out about that beyond our diocese, people said, we want in. So we monetized because the tools that we wanted to incorporate, like a forum and these workshops that were led by expert communicators in their various fields, we wanted to expand and explore how we could grow this ministry. We are now at, I think today, 398. If 2 people want to join, we can hit that 400 mark, by the way. Feel free to join tonight. I'll make you a deal. But we're at 400 members. And after about the 6th person late last year said, we really need an in-person communications conference. It's just not being provided. These tools aren't being provided in this way elsewhere. So can we do it? So we are hosting the Caffeinated Church Conference in September 9th through 12th in Denver. I really, really hope you carve out time for your communicator, volunteer, or your administrator for the church, administrators, plural, however your configuration is. This is going to be important for them. It's going to be great tools. The administrators conference, or the administrators retreat that we've done before at Cathedral Ridge, we're pivoting this year just based on timelines and such, and we're asking people to point yourself towards that Caffeinated Church Conference in September. Please set aside some funds to be able to send your your administrator there. Really important. But so lots of workshops that are going on. We're continuing to expand. I'm grateful for the bishop and her belief in this as a tool that should be for the wider church. Speaking of that, there is a group called, or was a group called Code, and it was diocesan staff members that were able to kind of resource one another. And that has been kind of defunct over the last several years. And so our diocese is going to take that on behalf of the Episcopal Church. We're going to develop some of the same tools that we've done through Caffeinated Church and try to really lean into that to be resourcing churches far and wide. We think the tools are out there, and we can not rebuild wheels that have already been built and learn from one another. So I'm excited about that. And that's coming down the pipe. So thank you, Bishop.
Thank you, Mike. Another thing that we have been working with in the Office of the Bishop and how we navigate this landscape has been specifically in the realm of how do we build relationships and space for folks from across the diocese to be engaged in holy conversation with one another. And I'm going to invite Canon Greg to talk a little bit about how we've experienced the gift of pilgrimage. Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Over the last number of years, we've offered pilgrimage and supported congregations in pilgrimage. And pilgrimage can be many things. It can be local, it can be regional, it can be across the country or international. And we found more and more people are wanting to reach out beyond their community and seek God out in the world. We have a group that was, I think, originally begun out of St. John's Breckenridge that's looking at how we can make pilgrimage to the Oglala Lakota Nation in this next year or so. We have a group out of Boulder and at St. Mary Magdalene Connections and St. John's that are looking at a pilgrimage in Germany around Hildegard of Bingen and the spirituality of Hildegard. In each of these cases, these are immersive experiences. They build on deep traditions and their times of learning, sometimes of mission, and sometimes of spiritual practice. Since the earliest time of Christian tradition, there has been an impulse to go out, to move, to walk, to make the way, in a sense, to make the way back to the core of our faith in these journeys. And so more and more congregations are reaching out to us for help to devise and create opportunities to engage their community in pilgrimage. We've also found that when we offer pilgrimage on behalf of the diocese, that people from across the diocese join in that. But it's striking to me that it's not people generally from the metro areas, but rather small congregations. And so it's a great opportunity for us to create opportunities for congregations that couldn't offer that on their own. And then we begin to build relationship and connection among people across our whole diocese. So that's some of what's happening right now.
Thank you, Greg. The other piece that I am very keen about and the role of the Office of the Bishop is that we are the steward of the gifts and labors of this diocese. And it is important to me that we are the best stewards that we can possibly be. And one of the challenges that we're working on right now is how do we move from being reactive. So what happens generally now is I will get a call, or my new canon for mission and operations will get a call from a congregation that says, we're done. We're done. We can't do it anymore. And we get the keys. And because we are because property is held in trust for the diocese, we inherit it, and it's a hard and heartbreaking thing, because often it's buildings that have a lot of deferred maintenance, that need a lot of work, that are languishing, for lack of a better word, and then we have to figure out how we steward that. We have canons that speak to some of things, and they have words like mission and imperiled parish, and those in our context aren't necessarily helpful. And so part of what the work that not only we're doing in the Office of the Bishop, but the standing committee of the diocese, that is the representative body of the entire state, we're trying to figure out what is a better way to be good stewards of the property that we have, and to help congregations figure out how they leverage the gift of their property. how they care for it, and then how do they leverage it as a tool for ministry, to support their own ministry. We don't have a lot of answers of that. I am impressed that there are several congregations who are really leveraging their buildings. And one particular congregation, I believe, has something going on in the building every day of the week, which is really powerful to me and means a lot for a small congregation to have that as their mindset. And so part of what I'm hoping that we'll imagine is, how do we help other congregations figure out how to leverage their assets in ways that help build and support ministry? John, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you, Bishop. I was just thinking as you were talking about that one of the surest ways to get a conversation started about property is to loft ever so gently the concept of removing the pews from the nave, and then just sit back and watch the reactions about how people react to that. But as the bishop was talking about the assets that we are the custodians of, what came to mind for me is one of the congregations that the bishop was referring to, which was Our Merciful Savior in the Highlands neighborhood here in Denver, which is emblematic, I think, the notes I just jotted down for myself, of where the church has been historically. Beautiful old building in one of the classic Episcopal styles architecturally, with pews, beautiful pews that another rector in the diocese has already said to me that they would love to have in their church. And so maybe we can negotiate about that. But emblematic of where we've been, where we are now, in that it's a closed congregation, and then in the most positive way possible, where that reality might provide us with the opportunity to vision, which we're going to talk about in our breakout groups a little bit, to vision what could be. And so when I think about those things in the context of property, and I hear the encouraging things that there are already congregations that are busy all the time as locations, as beacons of hope in their neighborhoods, and a variety of different contexts, from 12-step to worship to all kinds of things. Those are the ways in which I think we can leverage those things that previously we kind of reserved for ourselves in a way, and really open those up. And the funny anecdote that seems to be apropos these days in where a neighborhood is likely to grow is how many yoga mats you see being carried down the sidewalk at any given time. And so if that is true, then the Highlands neighborhood where OMS is in good shape, because every time I'm over there, I see lots of yoga mats walking by. So that is part of the work that is in my portfolio, is trying to help us think about expanded, and I would even say better uses for our property, and how we might move forward into the church that we are giving birth to, and how some of those beautiful old buildings that we own can be used more productively. Sounds like a business word, more in a more spirit-filled way, so that more and more people are drawn to the building, and that we are much more part of the community as we do that, as we open our doors. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So what I want to sort of, before we sort of go into breakout rooms, I want to hold for you I want you to think about your context, where you are. I want you to think about what has changed. Now, I've coming up on 5 years in March. I've only been here 5 years. Oops, I froze. Wait, where am I? Stop. Okay. What has changed in the 5 years that I've been here is pretty substantial. I look at my neighborhood and how it's changed in 5 years. And I want you to think about your context, however long you've been there. What has changed around you? What is different about your context? Who, you know, what neighborhoods have sprouted up around you or your congregation? What's become different in the economy of your community? What has changed? And as you think about what has changed, I want you to also think about whether or not church has adapted to those changes. Church as you know it has adapted to those changes.
Bishop, do you want to take time for some questions before we head into breakout rooms?
Sure, we got a little time, so let's do that. You put your question in the chat, I assume?
If anybody has a question, feel free to ask it. You can either unmute or you can put it in the chat. Can a link to Caffeinated Church be provided? Absolutely.
Hey, John Curley. Other questions?
Bishop,
Yes.
I'm wondering if maybe you could discuss the role that some of our present diocesan institutions will either be used to kind of deploy this visioning work, or do you see that there may be some realignment of some of our traditional diocesan institutions?
You know, at this point, I think everything is, I have to say, as a mom, I have very different kids. So I had the one kid who would take the Legos out of the box and put it together exactly the way the Millennium Falcon's supposed to be put together, right? He'd build it. And then I had a daughter who would just take the Legos and throw them up in the air and figure out how to build something. She's the one who is studying mechanical engineering right now. And I think we are in a place where we're just going to have to throw the Lego box up and sort it out as it comes down. And so I know that they're in our hearts as an Episcopalian. I know there have been in mine sacred cows, and we can no longer afford to have sacred cows. We have to be willing to examine everything, to ask ourselves, is this serving us? Is this going to help us move forward? Is this helping us build the kind of community that we want to build? Is this helping us manifest the gospel in real and tangible ways? And I think we're going to have to ask that of everything. I know the president of the standing committee and I have been in conversation, and we're talking about how can we, given our broad geography, help leverage leadership in this diocese. We have a small standing committee that has a huge job. And we also have lots of resources that I think as a diocese go untapped. And so figuring that piece out is going to be important. Figuring out how we leverage the structures we have to help us accomplish this mission that is before us, and help us be more clear in our discernment. We're going to have to figure all of that out, and that's going to require us to be able to engage our imaginations, because if we can't imagine something differently, then change just feels like loss, right? It doesn't feel like the natural progression of what our faith journey is about. It just feels like loss. And so we're gonna have to really be intentional about reimagining what our structures are and how they serve us.
Bishop Kim, I'm in the chat. We have two people asking, is the diocese looking at ways to make the process of ordination easier and faster to navigate?
No, no, we're not, because I don't think the process is necessarily the problem. One of the things as the guardian of the institution that I have to be aware of is that my task is to ensure that we have well-formed clergy, really well-formed clergy, and that is a process that takes time. There is so much about church work that can be translated in sort of the business world language, but there's so much that can't be. The place of good boundaries, the place of sound stewardship, the place of recognizing, as so many of my clergy have recognized, that sometimes they have to be the grown-up in the room when nobody else wants to be there. It is why we're taking a step back and being very intentional and streamlining our process and standardizing our process for our lay pastoral leaders. Church has to be a safe place. And part of that is about the formation of leaders to be safe leaders. And so we are very intentional. I am very intentional about that. That is my determination that church has to be a safe place. And it's important that those who are going into ordained ministry are in processes of intentional formation. Now, like I said, we don't know what the landscape of seminary is going to be like, so we're making adjustments about that all the time. But I don't think speed is the answer. But that's me. I mean, we can have that conversation. I'm open to it, but I think as I have had to deal with Title IVs in my tenure as bishop, I don't think speed is the answer. I think formation is very, very important. So
we have a few more questions. I'm not sure how long we have until we need to do the breakout rooms. I can capture these questions and we can always send emails and even in maybe the newsletter to answer them. Do you want to take the next question?
Sure.
Okay. What are some of the ways you hope congregations will connect and build relationships? What role do the regions play? And what do you imagine building relationships looks like? How do we sort the Legos together? What are the spaces to imagine together? Okay, that was about 7 questions.
It was. I think I only have time for one. One of the things that I think building relationship looks like is about conversation. And that's why I'm so glad to see all of you folks here, because I think conversation helps us build relationships. I learned very quickly as a parish priest that my initiative to do something collaborative with another church and me and the other priests talking to each other didn't get a darn thing done. But when we got our wardens to talk to each other, we figured out how to do ministry together, from everything from joining together for the Pride Parade to sharing Shrove Tuesday back and forth between our congregations. That wasn't about the clergy talking, that was about the lay leaders being in relationship and conversation together. And so that is part of why we are having these encounters, because I think the foundation of good relationship is us being in conversation, talking with and listening deeply to one another.
Thank you, Bishop. We're going to go into our breakout room times. The Supposedly, we've not done this yet, but you'll be able to go into the breakout room as how you answered the poll as to what region you are in. I'm certain that we'll have a few people that are behind that if they didn't get a chance to take the poll, and we can place you in those regions. So Kirsten, if you want to go ahead and launch that, we're going to come back at 8:23 to close in prayer.